Season 2 of Avatar. The Last Airbender opens as a terrified group of refugees escapes Omashu only moments before Princess Azula, the merciless daughter of Fire Lord Ozai, completes her takeover of the city. With no safe place to stop, they press onward, desperately trying to outrun the Fire Nation troops closing in behind them. Just when it appears that capture is inevitable, Team Avatar arrives to defend the fleeing survivors. It immediately becomes clear that they are far more capable than they were before. Sokka now fights with confidence and proven skill. Katara has grown into a remarkably powerful waterbender, using precise technique, impressive strength, and complete mastery of her abilities. Under her instruction, Aang has improved considerably as well, though he still has a long journey ahead before reaching her level. The tide of the battle turns even more decisively once Suki appears with the courageous Kyoshi warriors, bringing the backup everyone had been hoping for. As the conflict keeps the Fire Nation forces distracted, Aang quietly sneaks into the prison in search of his longtime friend, King Bumi. His mission is simple: rescue Bumi and convince him to become the Earthbending teacher who will guide his training. Bumi refuses to escape, revealing that his capture was entirely intentional. Rather than forcing the people of Omashu to risk their lives defending him, he chose to surrender peacefully and spare the city from unnecessary bloodshed. Although Aang pleads with him to come along, Bumi remains calm and unwavering, convinced he has made the right choice. Before they part, he leaves Aang with a cryptic piece of wisdom, explaining that the earthbending teacher he seeks is someone who knows when to listen, wait, and act at the proper moment. The mysterious advice gives Aang plenty to think about as he rejoins Katara, Sokka, Suki, and the refugees. The group continues its journey until they arrive at the infamous Serpent's Pass, a dangerous crossing feared throughout the Earth Kingdom. Hoping to guide everyone across safely, Aang and Katara combine their waterbending to separate the rushing water and create a temporary path through the river. For a brief moment, the plan appears successful. Then Fire Nation troops suddenly arrive and unleash streams of fire into the water. At first, everyone believes the attack is aimed at the refugees, but they soon discover the soldiers are trying to drive back a gigantic sea serpent lurking beneath the surface. Initially, Team Avatar assumes the enormous creature is fighting against the Fire Nation, but that belief quickly proves mistaken. The serpent suddenly charges toward the shore and begins attacking the terrified refugees instead. Aang and Katara respond immediately, using powerful waterbending techniques to force the beast away from the civilians. During the struggle, however, they accidentally wound the creature. Once the fighting ends, they realize it was never acting out of cruelty but was simply an injured animal reacting to the chaos surrounding it. Feeling responsible, Aang and Katara use healing waterbending to treat its injuries. The experience teaches Aang an important lesson, that bending is meant not only for combat, but also for healing, compassion, and restoring harmony. After successfully making it through Serpent's Pass, Team Avatar resumes its journey toward Ba Sing Se, the greatest city in the Earth Kingdom. Compared with Omashu, its size, defenses, and importance are unmatched. For countless refugees, it represents the safest remaining refuge and the kingdom's strongest symbol of hope. At the same time, its strategic value makes it the next major objective for the Fire Nation, ensuring that the conflict will eventually reach its massive walls. Ba Sing Se stands as the greatest refuge left in the Earth Kingdom, drawing refugees from every direction with the promise of safety behind its enormous walls. Its importance also makes it the Fire Nation's most valuable target. At a royal war council, Azula presents an ambitious strategy for conquering the city, impressing Fire Lord Ozai with her intelligence. Even so, he appoints another commander to lead the military campaign while assigning Azula a different task: locate the exiled Prince Zuko and his uncle Iroh. Far from the luxury they once knew, Zuko and Iroh survive by doing exhausting manual labor for very little pay. Iroh adapts to their modest life with patience, but Zuko grows increasingly bitter and frustrated. Eventually, his anger erupts. He accuses Iroh of allowing Ozai to seize the throne instead of claiming it himself after the death of Liu Ten. Believing his uncle's choices led to their family's downfall, Zuko storms off, determined to resume his search for the Avatar on his own. Azula correctly predicts her brother's next move. Rather than searching blindly for him, she decides to follow the Avatar's trail, convinced Zuko's obsession will eventually bring him to the same destination. Meanwhile, Team Avatar reaches the prosperous town of Jialing. Aang expects the generosity once common among the air nomads, but quickly realizes the world has changed and food must be earned or purchased. Looking for a way to support both his friends and the refugees, he enters an underground earthbending competition that offers prize money to the winner. The arena's famous champion appears ready to dominate until a mysterious young competitor known as the Blind Bandit enters the ring. Despite her blindness, she defeats experienced opponents with astonishing precision by sensing vibrations through the ground. Watching her effortless mastery, Aang recalls Bumi's advice about finding a teacher who understands patience and listening. He immediately suspects this extraordinary earthbender is the mentor he has been searching for. Before Aang can introduce himself, the Blind Bandit disappears after the tournament. Soon afterward, Team Avatar is invited to the estate of the influential Beifong family. There they discover an incredible secret: the Blind Bandit is actually Toph Beifong, the sheltered daughter of one of the wealthiest families in the region. Her parents believe she is delicate and incapable of caring for herself, never realizing she secretly competes as one of the strongest earthbenders in the underground arena. During dinner, Aang nearly reveals Toph's hidden identity. She quickly stops him without alerting her parents, secretly sending him a message through earthbending to meet her later and keep her double life a secret. When they finally speak in private, Toph explains how everything began. As a small child, she wandered into a cave where she encountered the Badger Moles, the original earthbenders. From them, she learned to experience the world through the earth itself, developing a unique style of earthbending that transformed her greatest challenge into her greatest strength. Toph explains that when she was a young child, she became lost inside a cave inhabited by badger moles, the legendary creatures recognized as the first earthbenders. Because they were blind just as she was, they shared an unspoken connection. Instead of relying on sight, they understood the world through vibrations traveling across the ground. By observing their movements and practicing their techniques, Toph developed a remarkable form of earthbending unlike anyone else's. Her parents, however, know nothing about her true abilities. Believing their daughter is weak and defenseless, they keep her under constant supervision and insist that her instructor teach only the safest, most basic skills. They see someone who needs protection from every danger, while the truth is that Toph is already one of the strongest earthbenders in the region. Although she wants to become Aang's teacher, she feels trapped by the strict control her family has over every aspect of her life. At the same time, Zuko arrives in Jialing during his travels. Along the road he witnesses Fire Nation soldiers intimidating a young farmer by demanding an unfair share of his harvest. Unable to ignore the injustice, Zuko intervenes and helps the boy. In return, the grateful siblings offer him a place to stay. His brief peace ends the moment he learns that the Avatar is nearby, prompting him to resume his pursuit immediately. Before Zuko can reach Aang, Azula confronts him. She claims that Fire Lord Ozai has forgiven his exile and wants him to return to the Fire Nation. Zuko refuses to believe her, certain she has another motive. Their argument quickly becomes a fierce battle, and Team Avatar soon arrives in the middle of the conflict. Toph demonstrates enough of her extraordinary earthbending to force Azula to abandon the fight. During her retreat, Azula strikes Iroh, who had stepped in to protect his nephew. Katara offers to heal him with waterbending, but Zuko rejects the gesture, unwilling to accept help from those he still considers his enemies. The encounter highlights the difference between the royal siblings. Even as children, Zuko often showed kindness and compassion inherited from his mother, Ursa, while Azula displayed a far colder nature. Ozai encouraged competition and ambition, pushing both children to view one another as rivals rather than family. Ursa recognized the harm this was causing and tried to shield them from their father's influence, but her efforts ultimately failed. Those experiences continued to shape Zuko, leaving him torn between his sense of honor and his desperate desire to earn his father's approval. Meanwhile, Toph finally decides she can no longer live according to her parents' expectations. Declaring that she is stronger than they have ever believed, she leaves home and joins Team Avatar as Aang's earthbending teacher. Her parents refuse to accept her decision and hire skilled bounty hunters to capture her and force her back. As the group continues toward Ba Sing Se, Toph detects unfamiliar vibrations beneath the earth and realizes someone is following them. To keep the refugees safe, she and Aang separate from the main group, drawing the pursuers away while Katara and Sokka escort everyone else toward the city. The trackers soon reveal themselves as the bounty hunters employed by the Befongs. Seeing an opportunity, Toph uses the confrontation as Aang's first practical earthbending lesson. However, he quickly discovers that earth is the complete opposite of air. Instead of standing firm, his instincts tell him to dodge and avoid every attack, making the new discipline far more difficult to master than he expected. Aang's first attempts at earthbending go poorly. With Toph, the bounty hunters, and everyone else shouting instructions during the fight, he becomes overwhelmed and loses focus. Unable to apply the lessons he has just learned, he falls back on his familiar waterbending techniques to defeat their attackers instead. Although they escape safely, it is obvious that mastering earthbending will require Aang to change the way he thinks rather than simply learn new moves. As the group reaches the outer walls of Ba Sing Se, they discover that Sokka, Katara, and the refugees have been detained by the city guards. Toph quickly changes the situation by revealing that she belongs to the influential Beifong family. The guards immediately recognize her family's status, release the prisoners, and allow the refugees to enter the city without further trouble. Once inside Ba Sing Se, Team Avatar expects to finally catch a break, but new concerns arise almost immediately. The Mechanist warns them that Sozin's comet is approaching, a rare celestial event that will dramatically increase the power of every Fire Nation firebender. Realizing the danger, Aang decides they must convince the Earth King to launch a military response before the Fire Nation gains an overwhelming advantage. However, reaching the Earth King proves nearly impossible. Their assigned guide, Ju Di, politely controls every aspect of their visit, steering them away from anything outside the official itinerary. Her cheerful demeanor hides an unwavering determination to prevent them from discussing the war or contacting the king directly. Even simple requests are quietly redirected or denied. The team eventually attends a lavish gathering in the city's upper ring, where they are shocked by how detached the wealthy citizens are from the conflict devastating the rest of the world. Protected by Ba Sing Se's enormous walls, many of the city's elite behave as though the war is little more than a distant rumor. General Sung reinforces this attitude, insisting that the kingdom has no obligation to concern itself with suffering beyond the capital. Determined to be heard, Aang attempts to approach the Earth King himself, but the Dai Li prevent him from getting anywhere close. Soon afterward, the influential minister Long Feng introduces himself. Friendly, generous, and seemingly eager to help, he promises to deliver Aang's warning personally. Instead, the message is filtered through him, and the Earth King dismisses the concern without ever speaking directly to the Avatar. Frustrated by every obstacle placed before them, Aang confides in Long Feng about everything the Mechanist revealed regarding Sozin's comet. Without realizing it, he exposes how much Team Avatar knows, making them a serious threat to Long Feng's carefully maintained control over the city. That very night, the Mechanist mysteriously disappears after being quietly taken away by the Dai Li, while the rest of Ba Sing Se carries on as if nothing unusual has happened. Elsewhere, Azula continues her relentless pursuit of Zuko and Iroh, driving them toward a crowded harbor filled with desperate refugees trying to escape. Panic erupts as people rush aboard a departing ship, and Azula shows no hesitation in striking down anyone left behind. During the confusion, Iroh is injured, and his condition steadily worsens throughout the journey. Aboard the vessel, Zuko encounters Jet and the freedom fighters once again. Jet proposes breaking into the captain's secured quarters to steal food and medicine. Although Zuko initially rejects the idea, he changes his mind after learning that medical supplies inside could save Iroh's life. Once they get inside, Jet immediately gathers provisions for his own group and escapes, abandoning everyone else. In contrast, Zuko chooses to stay behind and help the trapped freedom fighters reach safety, revealing the compassion that still exists beneath his hardened exterior. After escaping with the supplies, Zuko chooses not to keep them for himself. Instead, he distributes the stolen food among the starving refugees aboard the ship, earning genuine gratitude from the desperate passengers. Watching Zuko risk himself for complete strangers forces Jet to confront his own selfish decisions. Although Zuko refuses to admit it, his actions reveal a compassionate side that continues to surface despite everything he has been taught. Meanwhile, life in Ba Sing Se carries on as though nothing is wrong. Several days pass before anyone realizes the Mechanist has vanished. Sokka had been leaving messages outside his room, assuming he was simply occupied, until the silence becomes impossible to ignore. At the same time, Aang continues spending time with Long Feng, who maintains the appearance of a trusted ally while secretly guiding every conversation. Aang's training also continues, but he still struggles with earthbending because he relies too heavily on what he can see instead of trusting the subtle vibrations beneath his feet. Katara takes a different path through the city. Disguising herself as a Kyoshi warrior after dark, she slips into the lower ring to help neglected families living far from the comfort enjoyed by the city's elite. During this period, Professor Zay grows concerned after hearing that the Mechanist has disappeared. He quietly explains that people sometimes vanish in Ba Sing Se after asking the wrong questions, suggesting that powerful forces are working to preserve the illusion that everything inside the walls is peaceful. Long Feng attempts to calm Team Avatar by claiming the Mechanist was arrested because of his previous connections to the Fire Nation. The explanation contains just enough truth to sound believable, allowing Aang to trust him for a little longer. That confidence begins to fade when Aang notices he is being followed through the streets. Rather than confronting the mysterious observer, he cleverly reverses the situation and starts tracking the person who had been tracking him. Katara is supposed to distract Judy while Aang investigates, but her attention is drawn elsewhere after she unexpectedly spots Jet in the city. Without Katara covering for him, Aang is intercepted before he can finish his investigation. To his surprise, the person waiting for him is General Sung, who secretly admits that the threat outside Ba Sing Se is very real. Although she publicly supports the official narrative, she privately believes the Fire Nation is preparing for a major assault. She urges Aang to explain everything he knows, including Sozin's comet and the disappearance of the Mechanist. General Sung also reveals the truth about Long Feng. Far from being a helpful advisor, he is the hidden authority controlling the Dallas and manipulating events throughout the city. Aang struggles to accept the revelation because Long Feng has carefully earned his trust. Hoping to settle the matter directly, he heads for the royal palace, only to find Long Feng waiting for him. There, Aang is introduced to another smiling Judy who behaves exactly like the previous one, making it painfully clear that people can simply be replaced whenever necessary. At that moment, Aang realizes just how deeply the city's leadership has deceived him. Elsewhere, Katara follows Jet and discovers that he intends to drive Fire Nation refugees out of Ba Sing Se. The growing hostility began after violence involving a Fire Nation resident led to an entire community being blamed for the actions of a few individuals. Jet hopes to take advantage of that anger and even asks Zuko to join his cause. Zuko refuses and instead warns the refugee families that they may soon be attacked. Refusing to abandon their homes once again, they choose to stay. When Jet and the freedom fighters finally make their move, Zuko dons the blue spirit mask to defend the innocent civilians. Katara arrives at nearly the same moment with the same objective. As the confrontation unfolds, Jet recognizes Katara's waterbending, while Zuko realizes that if she is present, the Avatar cannot be far away. Despite everything he has experienced, his determination to capture Aang still refuses to disappear. At the same time, the political turmoil inside Ba Sing Se is overshadowed by an even greater threat steadily approaching the city's walls. As tensions continue to rise inside Ba Sing Se, Azula finally reaches the city with Mai and Tai Li. Earlier, the Kyoshi warriors had departed after Ba Sing Se's officials insisted the war posed no threat to the capital. On their journey, however, they discovered Fire Nation forces advancing toward the city and attempted to return with the warning. Before they could make it back, Azula's team ambushed them, defeated them in battle, and sent the captured warriors to a Fire Nation prison. With the Kyoshi warriors out of the way, Azula takes advantage of the opportunity. She and her companions disguise themselves in the warriors' uniforms, allowing them to enter Ba Sing Se without attracting suspicion. To make their deception even more convincing, they escort General Ving as a prisoner, pretending they captured him while defending the city. The grateful citizens welcome them as heroes, completely unaware that 3 of the Fire Nation's most dangerous operatives have just slipped behind their walls. Meanwhile, Team Avatar realizes that warnings alone will never convince the Earth King to prepare for war. They need undeniable proof about Sozin's comet. Professor Zay suggests searching for answers in the legendary library of Wanchur Tong, an ancient repository of knowledge hidden within the spirit world. Long ago, the spirit withdrew the library from the human world after witnessing people misuse its knowledge to wage war, leaving behind only a faint spiritual trace of its former location. Jet guides the group across the desert to the site where the library once stood. Using his spiritual abilities, Aang leads everyone into the spirit world, where they finally discover the enormous library preserved by Wanchur Tong himself. The owl spirit is deeply suspicious of human visitors because previous guests abused his trust and even destroyed valuable knowledge during the 100-Year War. Professor Zay earns them entry by offering a rare scroll in exchange, honoring the library's principle that knowledge must always be traded rather than taken. Wanchur Tong reluctantly accepts but warns the group that anything they learn must never be used to wage war. Inside the endless halls, each member of the team uncovers something different. Aang encounters Avatar Kuruk, who reminds him of the terrible danger of the Avatar state. Should the Avatar be killed while in that form, the cycle of reincarnation would end forever, leaving the world without another Avatar. The warning forces Aang to recognize that his greatest strength also carries the greatest possible consequence. Elsewhere, Katara and Jet discover reminders of the freedom fighters who were lost during the war. The memories reopen old wounds for Jet, who still blames himself for leading children into battles they were never prepared to fight. Katara encourages him to stop carrying that burden alone, reminding him that they were all victims of a conflict far beyond their understanding. Toph's search leads her to Avatar Kyoshi, whose guidance reveals a crucial piece of history. Although Sozin's comet greatly increases the power of firebenders, there is another rare event capable of stripping that power away completely. During a total solar eclipse, firebenders temporarily lose their bending. At the same time, Sokka follows one of the library's spirit foxes to a collection of astronomical records and discovers a celestial chart that may reveal exactly when the next eclipse will occur. Realizing the importance of the discovery, the group gathers around the ancient records, knowing that the information could provide the one opportunity the world has to challenge the Fire Nation on equal terms. Just as Team Avatar prepares to leave the Spirit Library with the information they need, Professor Zay reveals his true intentions. He informs Wanchur Tong that the group plans to use the library's knowledge to gain an advantage in the war. Feeling betrayed once again by humanity, the ancient spirit erupts in fury. To Wanchur Tong, this confirms that people will always twist knowledge into a weapon. Zay receives no reward for his betrayal. Instead, the enraged spirit turns on him along with everyone else, forcing the entire group to flee through the collapsing library. Toph is the first to reach the exit back into the physical world. Behind her, the entrance begins closing as Wanchur Tong attempts to bury the library forever beneath the desert. Refusing to abandon her friends, Toph braces herself and uses every ounce of her earthbending to hold the sinking structure in place. The effort gives the others enough time to escape, but while all of her attention is focused on supporting the collapsing entrance, she is unable to protect Appa. During the confusion, unknown attackers seize the sky bison and disappear before anyone can react. Inside the library, Jet stays behind to delay Wanchur Tong's pursuit, sacrificing his own chance to escape so the others can reach safety. His decision allows Team Avatar to survive, but the victory feels hollow. The moment Aang realizes Appa has vanished, grief overwhelms him. In his desperation, he directs his anger toward Toph, blaming her for not preventing the kidnapping despite everything she had already done to save the team. Although devastated by the loss of Appa, the group knows they cannot ignore the discovery they made. The coming solar eclipse could temporarily strip firebenders of their abilities, creating the perfect opportunity to challenge the Fire Nation. Determined to deliver this crucial information, they seek an audience with the Earth King. General Sung secretly helps them enter the palace by concealing them inside a supply cart, allowing them to bypass the city's security. When they finally meet the Earth King, they are surprised by his gentle and sheltered nature. Rather than an experienced ruler, they find someone who has been carefully isolated from the realities of the 100-Year War. As Team Avatar explains everything they have learned, Long Feng arrives and immediately begins undermining their credibility. Instead of inventing outright lies, he presents carefully selected truths, exposing Katara's secret activities, Toph's family connections, the Mechanist's past, and other details that cast suspicion on the group. By mixing fact with manipulation, he leaves the Earth King uncertain about whom he should believe. The king then asks General Sung to confirm the truth. Although she knows Team Avatar is right, she publicly denies their claims because Long Feng has leverage over her, leaving her with no safe alternative. Even so, one detail deeply troubles the Earth King. Long Feng concealed the existence of a large Fire Nation force gathering near the kingdom's borders. The revelation plants the first seeds of doubt about the minister's loyalty and prompts the king to begin quietly questioning the situation for himself. After returning from the palace, the strain of recent events finally overwhelms Aang. The loss of Appa, the betrayals, and the constant setbacks push him to an emotional breaking point. During the heated confrontation that follows, the team realizes how many secrets they have been keeping from one another. Katara angrily confronts Sokka after learning he knew about the Beifong family's dealings with the Fire Nation and failed to tell the others. Sokka insists he had only recently discovered the information and had been trying to understand it himself, but emotions have already taken over. Frustration and resentment erupt from every direction until the argument drives the friends apart, leaving each member of Team Avatar to walk away alone at the moment they need each other most. Separated after their bitter argument, every member of Team Avatar unknowingly walks into a carefully prepared trap. Sokka follows reports that the Kyoshi warriors have returned to Ba Sing Se, only to discover that Azula's allies have been impersonating them. Before he has a chance to fight back, he is ambushed, immobilized, and taken prisoner. Katara continues her nighttime mission of helping people in the lower ring, but the trap waiting for her is just as effective. Toph faces an even more painful betrayal when her own mother secretly poisons her tea, leaving her too weak to resist before she is carried away to be returned home against her will. Elsewhere, Zuko reaches a turning point of his own. Earlier, while Team Avatar's spirits were inside the spirit world, he had found their unconscious bodies in the physical world. Standing over Aang, he had the perfect opportunity to capture the Avatar and finally reclaim his honor. Instead, he walked away. Something within him refused to take advantage of such a helpless moment. Around the same time, he quietly performed another act of kindness by leaving a toy for a frightened child he had seen earlier, revealing that his compassion is becoming harder to suppress. When Zuko hears that Katara has been captured, he attempts to rescue her, but the effort fails. He is defeated as well, and both of them are locked inside the same underground prison. With his friends missing and Appa still gone, Aang finds himself alone. Remembering Toph's lessons, he stops relying on his eyesight and instead concentrates on feeling the subtle vibrations flowing through the earth. For the first time, he truly connects with the principles she has been teaching him, allowing him to detect movement deep beneath Ba Sing Se and locate the hidden prison where his friends are being held. Aang soon joins forces with Iroh, who has also learned that Zuko has been imprisoned. Iroh reveals the existence of an ancient passage built long ago by Avatar Kyoshi. The entrance can only be opened through the combined use of all four elements, and together they succeed in unlocking it. After entering the underground tunnels, they rescue Sokka before making their way to the cell where Katara and Zuko are being held. Inside the prison, Katara finally discovers that the mysterious blue spirit who once came to her aid was actually Zuko. Instead of denying his past, Zuko openly admits that he wants to change and no longer wishes to be defined by the person he used to be. He even explains the painful truth behind the scar on his face, confessing that he believed he deserved his father's punishment, allowing the emotional wound to become a physical one as well. Moved by his honesty, Katara considers using the sacred spirit oasis water she has carefully preserved to heal him. Before she can make her decision, however, the moment is abruptly interrupted, leaving Zuko's path toward redemption uncertain once again. While these events unfold, Azula continues advancing her own plans inside Ba Sing Se. After entering the city in disguise, she quickly realizes that the Earth King holds little real authority and that Long Feng is the one truly controlling the government. Exploiting this knowledge, she deliberately creates a disturbance that leads to her arrest, ensuring she is brought directly before him. There she proposes a temporary alliance, offering to help eliminate his rivals in exchange for assistance in capturing both the Avatar and Zuko. Long Feng accepts the arrangement and immediately moves against General Sung, believing he has gained a powerful partner. In reality, Azula has no intention of sharing control. From the very beginning, her goal has been to seize Ba Sing Southeast for herself and place the Earth Kingdom under the Fire Nation's rule. Azula's plan reaches its final stage as she takes control of Ba Sing Se from within. After using Long Feng's ambition against him, she removes the remaining obstacles and places the Dai Li under her command. Long Feng realizes too late that he helped bring in someone far more ruthless than himself. The power he spent years collecting is taken away almost instantly by the very person he believed he could manipulate. When Aang encounters Long Feng during the chaos, he learns that the city has already begun falling apart behind the scenes. The Earth Kingdom's greatest stronghold is no longer being threatened from outside, it has been defeated from within. Meanwhile, Azula approaches Zuko with the offer he has spent years chasing. She promises that his exile can end, his status can be restored, and he can finally return home with the approval he always wanted. For a brief moment, Zuko appears close to choosing a different path. He has shown compassion, questioned his old beliefs, and started becoming someone better. But the temptation of regaining everything he lost proves too powerful. He chooses to stand with Azula, turning away from Team Avatar at the moment they needed him most. With the Dai Li fighting alongside Azula and the city already under enemy control, Team Avatar is quickly overwhelmed. Toph escapes from the metal prison created by her mother and demonstrates a groundbreaking ability, manipulating metal itself through earthbending. Even with this new skill, the odds remain heavily against them. Desperate to protect his friends, Aang enters the Avatar state. His power becomes enormous, pushing back their enemies and creating a brief chance for victory. But when the moment comes to finish the fight, Aang hesitates. Azula takes advantage of that hesitation and strikes him with a devastating lightning attack. Iroh intervenes, buying enough time for Katara to reach Aang and escape with the others. Once Appa is recovered, Team Avatar flees Ba Sing Se as the city officially falls into Fire Nation control. Katara uses the precious healing water from the Spirit Oasis in a desperate attempt to save Aang. He briefly regains consciousness, but the danger remains. Because he was struck while connected to the Avatar state, his survival is uncertain and the future of the Avatar cycle itself is at risk. The Fire Nation's victory in Ba Sing Se becomes one of the greatest turning points of the 100-Year War. A city once considered impossible to conquer has fallen, giving Fire Lord Ozai a massive strategic advantage. Looking at Netflix's adaptation overall, the series lands somewhere between disappointment and success. It is not the failure many feared, but it also does not completely capture the magic that made the original animated series so beloved. There are genuine strengths. The world feels large and visually impressive, the bending abilities create exciting action, and several performances show real dedication to the characters. The production clearly understands the appeal of the universe and succeeds in creating moments that feel like a true fantasy adventure. At the same time, the adaptation struggles to find the same balance as the original. Some scenes feel too serious, some dialogue lacks natural rhythm, and certain emotional moments are explained instead of being allowed to develop naturally. The story often focuses on major plot points while missing some of the smaller character interactions that gave the original its warmth. That is the biggest challenge of adapting Avatar. The series was never only about defeating the Fire Nation or mastering the elements. It was about friendship, humor, personal growth, and the quiet moments between major battles. Those smaller experiences made the characters feel alive. This version understands the larger story and respects many of its important ideas, but it does not always capture the same emotional energy. It has strong visuals, memorable scenes, and enough quality moments to make it worth watching, especially for newcomers discovering this world for the first time. For longtime fans, however, the animated series remains something special that this adaptation has not replaced. The live-action version feels less like a complete reinvention and more like the beginning of something that still has room to grow. The foundation is there, the potential is clear, but the journey toward greatness is not finished yet. The biggest issue with Netflix's Avatar, The Last Airbender, is that it often feels like it is very close to finding its identity, but never completely reaches that point. There are scenes where the visuals, performances, or emotional ideas come together and the series starts to feel like the adaptation fans hoped for. Then another moment arrives where the dialogue feels too obvious, the emotions are explained instead of experienced, or the pacing interrupts the impact of what should have been a powerful scene. That unevenness makes the show difficult to judge. It is not a failure that can simply be ignored, but it also does not consistently reach the level of greatness that its source material achieved. For viewers who have never experienced the animated series, this version can still work as an enjoyable fantasy adventure. The central concept remains strong. A young Avatar awakens after a century of absence, discovers a world damaged by war, and must learn how to carry a responsibility far beyond his own life. The conflict is easy to understand, the world is interesting, and the journey provides enough mystery and excitement to keep new viewers invested. The challenge comes from the audience that already knows the original. The animated Avatar, The Last Airbender, succeeded because it balanced so many different elements at once. It could be hilarious one moment, heartbreaking the next, and then move into a deeper discussion about identity, morality, or responsibility without feeling unnatural. That emotional balance made the characters feel like real people rather than simply pieces moving through a fantasy story. The live-action adaptation understands the main storyline, but it sometimes struggles to capture the same feeling. It can feel overly controlled, as if it is constantly trying to prove that it is serious and important. In doing so, it occasionally loses the lighter moments, the natural conversations, and the small character interactions that made the original journey so memorable. That is the key difference. Avatar was never only about defeating the Fire Nation or mastering the elements. The heart of the series came from watching these characters grow together. The friendships, mistakes, jokes, quiet conversations, and personal struggles were just as important as the larger battles. Still, there is plenty here worth appreciating. The production creates an impressive fantasy world, many of the performances show genuine effort, and the adaptation clearly respects the material it is based on. It is far from a careless remake, and it avoids many of the problems that damaged previous attempts to bring the story into live action. However, respect for the source does not automatically recreate what made the original special. A remake of a beloved story has a unique challenge. It is not competing only with other shows, it is competing with people's memories. Fans are not just comparing scenes, they are comparing emotions, moments, and the connection they built with these characters over years. That is why this adaptation carries such a difficult burden. The animated series is not simply remembered as a good fantasy show. For many viewers, it represents a meaningful part of their lives. Every creative choice is judged against that connection. The live-action version was always going to face that challenge. It had to honor what came before while also proving it had a reason to exist. Sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes it feels trapped between recreating the original and trying to become something new. Ultimately, Netflix's Avatar, The Last Airbender feels like a promising beginning rather than a finished achievement. It has ambition, strong visuals, and a genuine appreciation for the world it is adapting. But it still needs sharper writing, stronger character moments, and more confidence in allowing its heroes to simply exist rather than constantly move from one major event to another. The result is a series with clear potential. It is entertaining, occasionally impressive, and full of moments that show what it could become. But it has not yet captured the unique combination of humor, emotion, adventure, and heart that made the original series unforgettable. One major advantage Netflix's adaptation has is that it avoids the mistakes that damaged the previous live-action attempt. The 2010 film became a symbol of what fans feared most, a version of Avatar that kept the surface details while losing the personality, humor, and emotional core that made the original special. Because of that history, the announcement of another live-action adaptation came with understandable concern. Many viewers were not simply wondering whether it would be good, they were wondering whether it would repeat the same mistakes. In that sense, the Netflix series immediately clears a very low but important standard. It shows a genuine understanding of the world it is adapting. This version feels like it knows why the story matters. The different nations have distinct identities, the bending abilities are treated as meaningful parts of the world, and the characters are given room to exist beyond being simple plot devices. Aang feels like a child carrying an impossible responsibility. Zuko receives real attention as a conflicted character rather than just an angry enemy. Iroh brings moments of patience and emotional warmth. Even characters like Ousley and Azula are presented as forces with influence and personality rather than distant names in the background. Compared with the earlier film, the improvement is obvious. The production feels larger, the mythology receives more respect, and the people making the show clearly understand that Avatar is more than a collection of fantasy elements. However, that comparison can only take the series so far. A project cannot be judged forever by how much better it is than a previous failure. Eventually, it has to succeed on its own terms. And that is where the conversation becomes more complicated. Against the 2010 movie, Netflix's adaptation looks confident and thoughtful. Against the animated series, its weaknesses become much easier to notice. The live-action version often understands the events of the story but struggles to recreate the natural energy that made those events memorable. The older series had a rare ability to balance comedy, emotion, action, and serious themes without making any of them feel forced. The characters could be silly, vulnerable, inspiring, and flawed all within the same episode. The Netflix version often feels more focused on delivering important moments than allowing those moments to develop naturally. That difference explains why the reaction has been so mixed. This is not an adaptation that fails because nobody involved cared. In fact, the opposite is true. The effort is visible everywhere. The world looks carefully constructed, the cast is clearly committed, and there are many scenes that show the potential of this version. The frustration comes from knowing that the ingredients are there. The show has the right characters, the right universe, and the right foundation. Yet sometimes the emotional impact does not match the scale of the production. A scene can look impressive while still feeling slightly distant. A character moment can have the correct idea but lack the small details that make it truly powerful. That is why the series is difficult to label as either a success or a failure. It proves that Avatar can work in live action, and it gives new audiences a way into this world. At the same time, it also shows how difficult it is to recreate something that already connected with people so deeply. The biggest achievement of this adaptation may be that it proves a live-action version was possible. The biggest challenge is proving that it was necessary. To reach that point, future seasons will need to build beyond simply honoring the original and discover a stronger identity of their own. Moving beyond the mistakes of the previous live-action adaptation was only the beginning. The real challenge for Netflix's Avatar, The Last Airbender, was capturing what made the original series connect with audiences in the first place. That is where the adaptation has a much harder road ahead. The foundation of Avatar has always been remarkably effective because the central idea is both simple and limitless. The world is built around four elemental traditions: water, earth, fire, and air. Each culture has its own relationship with its element, and the Avatar exists as the one person capable of mastering all four and restoring balance when the world falls apart. That concept works because it creates an immediate understanding of the conflict. The Fire Nation has expanded its power, the other nations have suffered under decades of war, and the person meant to prevent this disaster vanished when the world needed him most. When the Avatar finally returns, he is not a legendary warrior who already has all the answers. He is a young boy trying to understand a world that moved on without him. That is the emotional foundation of the story. Beneath the fantasy battles and supernatural abilities, Avatar is about a child facing a responsibility far beyond his age. Aang is forced to deal with loss, guilt, and expectations while still trying to discover who he is. The idea works because his journey is not just about becoming stronger, it is about learning what kind of person he wants to become. The live-action series benefits from having such a strong starting point. The world itself remains compelling. The Water Tribe, the Fire Nation, and the remnants of the Air Nomad culture all feel like parts of a larger history shaped by conflict. Each location has the potential to reveal something new about the war and about Aang's place within it. The structure of the story is also one of its greatest strengths. Aang's search for mastery of the elements gives the journey a clear purpose. Katara and Sokka provide emotional support and different perspectives. The Fire Nation remains a constant threat, while Zuko's pursuit of Aang adds another layer because his mission is connected to his own identity and struggles. Even when the pacing is uneven, the core direction remains easy to follow. The audience understands what the characters are trying to achieve and why it matters. The conflict is personal as well as global. The Fire Nation's actions are not just political decisions happening in the background, they affect families, traditions, and entire communities. That larger impact is what gives the story its weight. The war is not simply a battle between good and evil forces. It is a world where ordinary people have spent years adapting to fear, loss, and uncertainty. Aang's journey matters because restoring balance means more than defeating an enemy. It means helping repair the damage left behind. One of the most interesting things about Netflix's Avatar, The Last Airbender, is that the reaction to it depends heavily on what a viewer already knows before starting the series. For someone discovering this world for the first time, the show has many qualities that make it an enjoyable fantasy adventure. The central concept is immediately appealing: a young hero returning after a century-long absence, a world divided by elemental powers, and a war that has changed the lives of every nation involved. The story has a clear direction, the mythology is easy to understand, and the visual design gives the series a strong sense of scale. A new viewer is not carrying the same expectations as longtime fans. They are not comparing every conversation to an animated version they already love. They are not wondering why certain moments were changed, shortened, or moved around. They are simply experiencing the journey as it unfolds. From that perspective, the adaptation has a lot working in its favor. The world feels large, the bending abilities create impressive action, and the conflict between the nations provides enough mystery and excitement to keep the story moving. A viewer unfamiliar with the original series could easily finish the season and come away feeling like they watched a solid fantasy adventure with room for future growth. For longtime fans, however, the experience is more complicated. They are not only judging what the adaptation includes, they are also noticing what feels different. They remember the original characters' personalities, the balance between comedy and drama, and the smaller moments that allowed the relationships to develop naturally. That difference is especially important because Avatar was never only remembered for its main storyline. The journey mattered because of the way the characters changed along the way. Aang, Katara, and Sokka were not simply traveling from one major event to another. They were becoming a family while dealing with a world shaped by conflict. The animated series had a unique rhythm. It could move from a ridiculous joke to a serious emotional moment without either side weakening the other. The humor made the characters feel alive, while the dramatic moments carried more weight because viewers had spent time with them outside of the larger conflict. The live-action adaptation sometimes struggles to recreate that same balance. It often focuses on the importance of the story but gives less space to the smaller interactions that made the characters feel natural. When scenes move quickly or rely on direct explanations, some of the emotional impact can be reduced. That does not mean the adaptation lacks value. The foundation remains strong because the world itself is strong. The ideas behind Avatar, restoring balance, confronting inherited conflict, and learning what it means to carry responsibility, are powerful enough to survive changes in presentation. The challenge is that fans are not only attached to the plot. They are attached to the feeling of the journey. They remember the conversations between battles, the moments of friendship, the mistakes, and the growth that happened quietly over time. That is the difficult position every adaptation of a beloved story faces. It must welcome new audiences while also respecting the connection existing fans already have. Netflix's version succeeds at introducing the world and preserving many of the major ideas, but it is still working toward capturing the emotional balance that made the original series so memorable. The smaller moments are a huge part of what made Avatar special. The humor, the awkward conversations, and the quiet episodes were never just distractions from the main story. They were the pieces that built the relationships. Those simple interactions helped the audience understand why the characters cared about each other, which made the larger emotional moments feel more powerful. This is where the Netflix adaptation sometimes feels like it has a stronger connection to the events of the story than to the feeling of experiencing that story. It knows the important plot points, but it does not always recreate the natural rhythm that allowed those moments to become memorable. That difference explains why reactions to the series have been so divided. A new viewer might see a visually impressive fantasy adventure with interesting characters, strong world building, and exciting action. A longtime fan might recognize the same foundation while feeling that some of the personality and emotional warmth of the original has been reduced. Neither response is necessarily wrong. They are simply coming from different perspectives. One person is discovering the world for the first time, while another is comparing it to a version that already created years of emotional attachment. There is also a group of viewers somewhere between those two extremes. Fans who appreciate the original but still approach the adaptation with an open mind. They may enjoy seeing the bending abilities brought into live action, appreciate the attention given to certain characters, or admire the effort behind the production. But even they may find themselves comparing moments and thinking about how differently the animated series handled them. That comparison is the hardest obstacle the show faces. The problem is not that the adaptation has nothing enjoyable to offer. There are strong performances, impressive visuals, and moments where the world feels exciting and alive. The challenge is that viewers who already know what Avatar can be may sometimes feel they are watching a polished recreation rather than a version that captures the full emotional depth. For newcomers, the series can serve as an introduction to this universe. For longtime fans, it becomes a more complicated experience because they are not only judging the quality of the show itself. They are also deciding how closely it connects to the spirit of something they already love. That is why there may never be one universal opinion about this adaptation. A first-time viewer may find it engaging and memorable, while someone familiar with the animated series may struggle with the differences. The question changes from simply asking, "Is this a good fantasy series?" to something much more personal. Does this still feel like the Avatar I remember? The Netflix version is also interesting because it clearly tries to respect the source material. This is not a project that completely abandons the original story or attempts to replace it with something unrelated. The major foundation remains intact. Aang is still the missing avatar returning to a damaged world. Katara and Sokka are still the people who help him begin his journey. The Fire Nation remains the force threatening global balance, and Zuko's pursuit of Aang still carries the emotional weight of a young man searching for purpose and approval. On a basic level, the adaptation understands the structure of the story. It recreates recognizable places, brings familiar characters into live action, and includes many moments that fans will immediately identify. The creators clearly wanted viewers to recognize the world and feel connected to the series they already knew. That effort is important, especially because previous attempts at adapting Avatar failed to capture the identity of the original. This version understands that the world has its own rules, that bending is connected to culture and philosophy, and that Aang's role is about restoring balance rather than simply defeating enemies. However, adaptation is about more than preserving events. Keeping the same scenes and ideas does not always guarantee the same emotional impact. A moment can look similar, contain the same characters, and follow the same basic structure while still feeling different. That is the difficult line the series has to walk. It succeeds at preserving much of the story, but recreating the exact feeling of the original is a much greater challenge. Adapting a story like Avatar is difficult because recreating the events is only one part of the challenge. A series can follow the same path, visit the same locations, and include the same major moments, but if the emotional pacing changes, the experience can feel completely different. The Netflix adaptation makes several choices that are understandable. With a limited episode count, the show has to compress a much larger animated season into a shorter format. Certain storylines have to be combined, some events have to happen sooner, and some characters or conflicts have to be adjusted to fit the structure of live action. Not every change is automatically a problem. Some decisions make sense because the goal is not simply to recreate the cartoon frame by frame. A live-action series needs its own rhythm, and the creators are clearly trying to build episodes that feel larger and more connected. The difficulty is that some of these changes affect the way the story develops. At times, the season feels like it is bringing together important moments from different parts of the original without always giving the characters enough time to reach those moments naturally. Familiar storylines appear, but the emotional foundation behind them is sometimes shortened. That creates a difference between recognition and impact. Seeing a familiar scene can make fans excited, but a memorable moment is not powerful only because it happened. It works because the audience understands the characters, their struggles, and the journey that brought them there. The animated series benefited from having more room to breathe. It could spend an entire episode on a smaller adventure, allow characters to be funny and imperfect, and slowly build relationships that would matter later. Those quieter moments were not filler. They were the reason the bigger emotional scenes carried so much weight. The live-action version often preserves the major events while reducing some of the smaller details connecting them. It keeps the important landmarks of the journey, but sometimes removes the little experiences that made the journey feel personal. That is why the series can feel both faithful and different at the same time. It respects the world, understands the mythology, and clearly wants to honor the original. It is far from an adaptation that ignores what fans loved. But faithfulness is not only about preserving names, locations, and plot points. It is also about protecting the emotions underneath those elements. The heart of Avatar was never just the war, the bending, or the destiny of the Avatar. It was about a group of young people growing together while carrying the weight of a damaged world. The humor, the friendship, the awkward moments, and the small acts of kindness were just as important as the major battles. Those details gave the story its personality. So the issue is not that the Netflix series is completely unfaithful. That would be unfair. It is better described as an adaptation that understands the structure but sometimes struggles with the spirit. It remembers what happens, but it does not always capture why those moments mattered so much. That is the challenge every remake of a beloved story faces. The audience is not only looking for familiar images. They are looking for the feeling that made the original special. With Avatar, The Last Airbender, the opportunity was always there. Modern technology can bring bending to life. A large budget can create impressive worlds. A passionate fan base can provide immediate attention. The question was never whether this universe could exist in live action. The real question was whether the adaptation could make viewers feel the same connection to the characters and their journey. From a production and business perspective, the decision to adapt Avatar, The Last Airbender into live action is easy to understand. The ingredients are almost impossible to ignore: a recognizable title, a passionate global fan base, fantasy elements, action, and characters that already have emotional connections with audiences. But creatively, the challenge is much more complicated. The original animated series is not a forgotten property waiting to be rediscovered. It is still widely appreciated because it continues to work on its own. The comedy remains effective, the emotional moments still carry weight, and the characters still feel natural and memorable. That creates a difficult situation for any live-action version. The adaptation is not only competing with people's memories of the original. It is competing with a series that viewers can return to right now and still enjoy. Because of that, there is almost no easy approach. If the new version follows the original too closely, audiences may question why they should watch a remake instead of returning to the animated series. But if it changes too much, longtime fans may wonder why the adaptation needed to use the Avatar name at all. The series often seems aware of this challenge. One way it tries to establish its own identity is through scale. The live-action format allows for larger sets, more realistic environments, dramatic visuals, and a heavier cinematic style. It wants viewers to experience this world in a different way rather than simply watching a direct copy. And there are moments where that approach works. Seeing bending abilities translated into live action has a certain excitement. Watching familiar locations become physical spaces can create a sense of wonder. There is something appealing about seeing a world that existed through animation transformed into something tangible. However, that initial excitement can only carry a series so far. Once the novelty disappears, the adaptation has to prove that it has a reason to exist beyond recreating something audiences already love. That is where the show faces its biggest challenge. At times, it feels like a version of a story that already had a stronger balance of humor, character development, and emotional timing. The production may feel larger, but scale alone cannot replace the small details that made the original special. That does not mean the live-action series has no value. It would be unfair to judge it only through comparison. For viewers who have never explored the world of Avatar, this adaptation can serve as an introduction. Some people may discover these characters, this mythology, and this story for the first time because of this version. That opportunity matters. A new adaptation can open the door for an entirely new audience, including people who may never have watched the animated series. But for longtime fans, the standard is different. A familiar story brought into a new format has to offer more than a recreation. It needs to provide a fresh perspective, a new emotional experience, or a reason that justifies returning to a world audiences already know. The question is not whether this live-action version can exist. It clearly can. The question is whether it can become something that feels essential rather than simply familiar. A successful adaptation needs more than additional material, bigger effects, or a more dramatic presentation. It needs to create a reason for its own existence. It needs to make viewers feel that this version brings something meaningful to the world rather than simply placing a familiar story into a different format. That is the challenge facing Netflix's Avatar, The Last Airbender. The series is not difficult to discuss because it is a complete failure. If it were truly terrible, the conversation would be simple. Viewers could point out the problems and move on. Instead, the show sits in a much more complicated space because it is competent. It has effort behind it. It has moments that work. It has enough quality to make people wish it reached a higher level. That creates a strange reaction while watching. Instead of thinking, "This is bad," viewers often find themselves asking a different question: why am I watching this version when the original already delivered this story so effectively? That question follows the series in many areas. It appears when familiar scenes are recreated but lack the same emotional impact. It appears when the tone becomes more serious but loses some of the natural warmth of the original. It appears when the show seems satisfied with the achievement of bringing an animated world into live action without always showing what the live action format adds. Of course, there is an appeal to seeing this universe in a new way. Watching bending abilities brought to life, seeing characters portrayed by real actors, and experiencing the nations through physical sets and visual effects can be exciting. For many viewers, that transformation alone may be enough reason to enjoy the series. And that perspective is completely understandable. A new interpretation can allow people to connect with a familiar story from a different angle. It can introduce the world to audiences who might never have experienced the original. But the adaptation still faces a larger creative challenge. It has shown that Avatar can work in live action. It has proven that the story is strong enough to survive outside animation. It has moved beyond the failures of the previous movie adaptation. What it has not fully achieved yet is proving that this particular version is necessary. That may be the biggest question moving forward. The goal cannot only be to recreate the original, avoid past mistakes, or satisfy existing fans. The series needs to become something that stands confidently on its own. Because when the source material is already exceptional, simply being acceptable is not enough. Another major weakness of the Netflix series is its pacing. The season often feels like it is moving according to a schedule rather than allowing the story to develop naturally. It is not the exciting feeling of a group exploring a huge world. Instead, it sometimes feels like the show is racing through important moments because there is too much material to cover. The animated series had more freedom. It could slow down, explore smaller conflicts, and spend time on adventures that did not immediately appear important. Those episodes helped build the characters. They showed their personalities, strengthened their friendships, and allowed the audience to understand who they were outside of the main mission. Those quieter moments were essential. They gave the world depth and made the characters feel like real people instead of just participants in a larger storyline. The live-action adaptation has fewer episodes and a much larger amount of story to fit into its season. Combining events and creating longer episodes is understandable from a production standpoint. A modern streaming series often has to maintain a faster pace and keep viewers moving through the main narrative. However, Avatar was never only about reaching the next major event. The journey between those events was where much of the emotional connection came from. This is where the compression creates problems. Characters sometimes enter the story and leave before they have enough time to make a lasting impression. Important emotional scenes happen, but the series quickly moves forward before those moments can fully settle. Multiple storylines are combined in ways that make sense logically, yet still feel rushed emotionally. Ironically, trying to make the story move faster can sometimes make it feel heavier. When there is not enough room for natural character development, the show has to rely more on explanation. Characters describe their feelings instead of allowing viewers to experience them. Conversations carry information that could have been communicated through quieter moments. The result is a season that moves quickly through events but does not always create the feeling of momentum. Speed is not the same as energy. A story needs space to breathe if the audience is going to truly connect with the people inside it. One of the biggest issues with the season is that it rarely slows down long enough to let its strongest moments breathe. The story moves from one important event to another at a rapid pace, yet it sometimes feels surprisingly heavy instead of energetic. That sounds contradictory, but it's easy to understand while watching. The plot races ahead, while the emotional side of the story struggles to catch up. Instead of allowing character growth to unfold naturally, the series often explains emotions through dialogue. Important developments happen, but viewers are quickly pushed toward the next conflict before those moments have time to settle. As a result, the season feels packed with events while still lacking the sense of momentum that made the original journey so satisfying. That difference matters because Avatar has never been only about action. At its heart, it is a story about friendship, growing up, and discovering responsibility while traveling through a world damaged by war. The battles are exciting, but they are meaningful because of the people fighting them. The animated series understood the importance of those quieter stretches. It gave its characters opportunities to joke with each other, argue over small problems, make mistakes, and simply exist together. Those scenes were not interruptions to the story, they were the story. They created relationships that made the dramatic moments feel genuine later on. The live-action adaptation often seems worried about slowing down. It moves from one recognizable event to another, almost as if every episode must constantly remind viewers of the next important destination. That approach keeps the narrative moving, but it also leaves less room for personality and connection. The pacing also affects the world itself. The nations of Avatar are meant to feel unique, each with its own traditions, atmosphere, and history. When the series spends only a limited amount of time in each location, those places can begin to feel like brief checkpoints instead of living cultures. Supporting characters sometimes appear, fulfill their role, and disappear before making a lasting impression. The frustrating part is that the series occasionally proves it can slow down successfully. Some of the strongest material involving Zuko, Iroh, and the Fire Nation allows conversations to develop more naturally. Those scenes benefit from patience, giving the characters room to reveal their motivations instead of rushing immediately into the next dramatic moment. That suggests the problem is not the cast or the concept. It is largely the amount of time available. A longer season might have created enough space for the relationships to develop more gradually without sacrificing the larger story. Few people realistically expected a live-action adaptation to match the episode count of the animated series. Producing visual effects, elaborate sets, and large action sequences requires a completely different scale of production. Even so, 8 episodes often feels restrictive for a story with this many characters and locations. An additional couple of episodes could have made a noticeable difference. More time would have allowed the main cast to relax between major conflicts, explore their personalities, and strengthen the friendships that ultimately define the series. That may be the biggest consequence of the compressed structure. The adaptation successfully remembers many of the important destinations from the original story, but it sometimes overlooks the value of the road connecting them. Watching the season, it becomes clear that the journey needed more room to unfold. The issue is not simply that events happen quickly. It is that the emotional consequences of those events are often left behind as the story rushes toward the next objective. The world begins to feel smaller because the characters are constantly moving forward instead of living inside the places they visit. The audience understands where they are going, but does not always have enough time to appreciate where they are. This is especially noticeable with Aang, Katara, and Sokka. Their relationship forms the emotional center of the story, and that bond develops best through ordinary interactions rather than dramatic speeches. They need opportunities to tease each other, disagree, solve small problems, and enjoy brief moments of happiness before facing another challenge. The adaptation clearly wants viewers to believe in their friendship, and many scenes point in that direction. However, genuine chemistry grows through shared experiences, not simply shared objectives. Spending more time with these characters between major battles would have made the emotional journey even stronger and allowed the heart of Avatar to shine more consistently. The strongest relationships in a story like Avatar are not created only during battles or major turning points. They are built during the quieter moments, the conversations on the road, the jokes between friends, the arguments that reveal personality, and the small experiences that slowly turn a group of strangers into a family. That is why additional space could have helped the adaptation so much. The issue was never that the story needed endless episodes or unnecessary detours. It needed enough room for the characters to exist between major events. A longer season could have allowed certain conflicts to develop more naturally. It could have separated some of the combined storylines, given supporting characters more time to matter, and created a smoother emotional rhythm. The goal would not be to slow the story down for no reason. It would be to give important moments the time they deserve. There is a difference between a story being slow and a story being patient. A patient story can still move forward. It can maintain tension while allowing audiences to understand the people carrying that tension. That balance is especially important for Avatar because the emotional connection has always come from the characters. Aang's happiness and sadness, Sokka's humor and insecurity, Katara's determination and compassion, and Iroha's wisdom all matter because viewers spend time with them outside of the biggest conflicts. Those moments are not breaks from the main story. They are what make the main story meaningful. When an adaptation removes too much of that space, the larger scenes can lose some of their impact. A dramatic speech, an impressive battle, or a major reveal only works as well as the emotional investment behind it. Spectacle can attract attention, but character connection is what keeps audiences invested. The first season clearly has many important ingredients. The world is recognizable. The central conflict remains compelling. The characters already have strong foundations. But the structure sometimes feels too restrictive for the amount of story it wants to tell. The result is a season that feels ambitious but compressed. It is not lacking ideas or effort. Instead, it often feels like it is trying to fit a much larger emotional journey into a smaller space. The pacing problem is also complicated because it does not simply move too quickly. In some places, the series rushes through events that needed more time. In others, it slows down through conversations that explain ideas rather than allowing the audience to experience them naturally. That creates an uneven rhythm. The show accelerates through character development but pauses for information. It moves quickly through important changes but spends more time describing feelings than building them. The animated series benefited from a wider range of storytelling. Not every episode needed to push the central conflict forward. Some stories were funny, unusual, or seemingly small, but they added personality to the world and strengthened the relationships at the center of the journey. Those moments helped audiences understand that the characters were not just heroes completing a mission. They were young people trying to survive, learn, and grow while dealing with circumstances far beyond their control. That sense of everyday life is one of the hardest things to recreate in a compressed adaptation. A story can preserve the major events and still lose some of the experiences that made those events meaningful. For Avatar, the journey is just as important as the destination. The world feels larger when the audience has time to explore it with the characters. The friendships feel stronger when viewers witness them forming naturally. The series has many of the right pieces. What it often needs is simply more room for those pieces to connect. And that is probably the biggest difference between the animated series and the live-action version. The original understood that characters are not just there to carry themes. They are people first. They can be wise one moment and ridiculous the next. They can say the wrong thing. They can avoid talking about what actually hurts them. They can hide behind jokes or anger or stubbornness. That messiness is what makes them feel real. The Netflix version sometimes feels like it is afraid of that messiness. It wants every scene to have a clear emotional purpose. It wants every conversation to move the story forward or explain a character's inner struggle. But real relationships do not always work that way. Sometimes people talk about nothing. Sometimes they argue over something small because they are avoiding something bigger. Sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when nobody gives a speech at all. That is why the quieter scenes in the animated series were so important. A joke between friends was not just a joke. It showed how comfortable they were becoming with each other. A silly argument was not just filler. It revealed their personalities. A small moment of kindness could tell you more about a character than a long explanation of their past. The live-action adaptation often knows the destination but rushes past the road that gets you there. This affects almost every major character. Aang is supposed to be carrying an impossible amount of responsibility while still being a child who wants to laugh, explore, and avoid growing up too quickly. That contradiction is what makes him interesting. He is not just a chosen one. He is a kid trying to survive the fact that the world expects him to become something he is not ready to be. The show understands Aang's trauma, maybe even too much. It wants you to know he is hurting. It wants you to understand the weight he carries. But sometimes it focuses so heavily on the burden that it forgets the joy. And Aang's joy was never a small part of who he was. His ability to stay hopeful in a world full of destruction was one of his greatest strengths. The same problem affects Katara and Sokka. Their relationship should feel like two kids slowly discovering that they need each other. They should annoy each other, challenge each other, and grow together. Instead, the season sometimes moves them from strangers to close friends too quickly. The bond is there because the story says it is there, but the audience does not always get enough time to watch it form. And that is the strange thing about this adaptation. It often has the right emotions, but the emotions do not always arrive at the right time. A scene might contain everything it needs to work. The actors are committed. The visuals are strong. The music is telling you this moment matters. But because the season has rushed to get there, the impact feels smaller than it should. The best adaptations are not just about recreating events. They are about recreating feelings. And that is where Netflix's Avatar has its biggest challenge. It knows what happened. It knows the important moments. It knows which characters fans love and which scenes people remember. But sometimes it feels like it is looking at Avatar from the outside, studying what made it successful, instead of naturally creating the same emotional experience. Still, I do think there is something worth appreciating here. The show does not feel like it was made by people who disliked the original. Quite the opposite. The biggest weakness of the series may actually come from how much it respects the source material. It is so focused on protecting what fans already love that it sometimes forgets to build its own identity. There is a difference between honoring a story and being trapped by it. A great adaptation should understand the heart of the original while also finding a new way to express it. It should make longtime fans recognize something familiar while giving them a reason to experience it again. Netflix's Avatar gets close to that idea in certain moments. The world looks impressive. Some character arcs are handled with care. The Fire Nation storyline especially shows that the series can create interesting drama when it slows down and focuses. But too often, the show feels like it is carrying a checklist of everything Avatar is supposed to contain. The nations. The bending. The characters. The important battles. The famous moments. The emotional speeches. All of those pieces are there. The harder thing, the thing the season has not fully mastered, is making those pieces feel alive together. Because Avatar was never special only because of its world. Plenty of fantasy stories have incredible worlds. What made Avatar stand out was the feeling that every part of that world was connected to the people living inside it. The war mattered because you cared about the people suffering from it. The victories mattered because you understood what the characters sacrificed to achieve them. The friendships mattered because you watched them grow from strangers into family. That emotional investment is what turns a good fantasy story into something people carry with them. And that is the one thing Netflix's first season is still searching for. It has the structure. It has the resources. It has the characters. It has the opportunity. Now it needs the confidence to slow down, trust the audience, and let Avatar simply be Avatar. Because the world was never the problem. The magic was always in the people. Let them be weird sometimes. Let them have moments that do not exist only to move the plot forward. Let them surprise us by acting like actual people instead of always acting like characters who understand the importance of the story they are inside. Because that is something the animated series understood better than almost anything. These characters never felt like they knew they were part of a legendary fantasy adventure. They were just trying to survive, help people, and figure themselves out. The humor came naturally because they were not constantly performing their importance. The live-action version sometimes feels like it is afraid of looking too childish. And that is a strange choice because the original proved that childish and meaningful are not opposites. Some of the most emotional moments in Avatar work because they come from characters who still have that sense of wonder. Aang can be dealing with the destruction of his entire culture and still get excited about flying or exploring somewhere new. Sokka can make a ridiculous joke and then immediately reveal a deep insecurity underneath it. Katara can be stubborn and frustrated while still being compassionate and hopeful. Those contradictions are what make them feel real. The Netflix version often understands the serious side of these characters but struggles with the lighter side. It gives them pain, but sometimes forgets to give them personality. It gives them trauma, but not always enough time to show who they are outside of that trauma. And that creates a strange emotional distance. You understand why Aang is sad, but you do not always get enough moments to enjoy why people love being around him. You understand why Zuko is angry, but you do not always get enough of the awkward, conflicted person underneath that anger. You understand why Katara wants to help people, but you do not always see the everyday moments that make her kindness stand out. The characters become easier to analyze than to connect with. That is probably why some viewers describe the season as feeling more like a summary of Avatar rather than an actual experience of Avatar. It contains the major emotions, but it sometimes skips the small human moments that create those emotions. And this is especially noticeable with the group dynamic. Aang, Katara, and Sokka are supposed to become a family. Not because they are destined to, but because they choose each other again and again. They travel together. They annoy each other. They learn each other's weaknesses. They forgive each other's mistakes. That kind of relationship cannot be created only through major speeches and dangerous situations. It is built through ordinary moments. A conversation while traveling. A joke around a campfire. A pointless argument that reveals something deeper. A moment where someone helps another person without making a big deal about it. Those are the scenes that make audiences believe these characters would actually stay together when things get difficult. Without enough of those moments, the friendship can sometimes feel like a requirement of the story instead of something naturally developing. And again, the frustrating thing is that the ingredients are all there. The actors have chemistry. The world looks expensive. The emotional foundation is strong. There are scenes where you can see the version of the show it wants to become. It just needs to stop treating warmth as something optional. Because warmth is not a weakness in Avatar. It is the reason the darker parts hurt. The reason the Fire Nation invasion feels tragic is because we know what peace looked like. The reason Aang's loss feels painful is because we know how much joy he carried. The reason Zuko's journey matters is because we see that he is not just an angry villain, but someone desperately searching for a place where he belongs. The light makes the darkness meaningful. Without enough light, the darkness simply becomes the atmosphere. And that is where the first season sometimes struggles. It has a strong understanding of the stakes, but not always the same understanding of the spirit. Going forward, the biggest improvement would not be adding more action or making everything bigger. The show already knows how to create spectacle. What it needs is confidence. Confidence to let characters joke. Confidence to let scenes be quiet. Confidence to let emotions exist without explanation. Confidence to remember that Avatar was never loved because every moment was important. It was loved because even the small moments mattered. The journey was not just about saving the world. It was about watching a group of kids become the kind of people who could save it. Because the emotional journey is the adventure. The bending, the battles, the spirits, the nations, and the war all matter, but they matter because of who is experiencing them. The reason we care about the world is because we care about the people moving through it. That is the difference between a story that is simply impressive and a story that stays with people. Netflix's Avatar understands the scale. It understands that this is a world-changing conflict. It understands that Aang is carrying the weight of an entire era. It understands that the Fire Nation's actions have consequences. But sometimes it forgets that the audience does not fall in love with worlds first. They fall in love with people. That is why the small moments are so important. A scene where Aang laughs at something ridiculous can tell us who he is. A moment where Sokka tries to act confident even though he is scared can tell us more about him than a speech about courage. A quiet conversation between Katara and Aang can show how much they have grown without anyone needing to announce it. Those moments are not breaks from the story. They are what make the story matter. And this is where the live-action adaptation sometimes feels like it has misunderstood what made the original special. It treats the big moments as the important ones and the smaller moments as things that can be removed to save time. But Avatar was built on the idea that the small moments create the big ones. The reason a character's sacrifice hurts is because we have spent time with them. The reason a victory feels earned is because we have watched people struggle before reaching it. The reason a friendship feels powerful is because we have seen it develop. You cannot shortcut that process. The show wants us to believe that Aang, Katara, and Sokka would do anything for each other, and by the end of the season, you can see that connection forming. But it often feels like we are watching the result of a friendship rather than the friendship itself. It is like opening a book halfway through and being told, these people are close now. You understand the information, but you miss the experiences that created it. That is the emotional gap the series keeps running into. And again, this does not mean the actors are incapable of creating that bond. There are flashes where it works. There are moments where their personalities come through. There are scenes where you can imagine this group becoming the family fans know they can become. But the season structure keeps interrupting that growth. It is always moving toward the next important event. The next battle. The next revelation. The next piece of history. The next reminder of the war. And eventually, the characters start feeling like they are carrying the plot instead of living inside the world. That is especially unfortunate because Avatar has always been a story about balance. Not just the balance between elements, but the balance between seriousness and joy. The Fire Nation war is horrifying, but the characters still laugh. The world is broken, but people still celebrate. The future is uncertain, but kids still find reasons to smile. That contrast is what gives the story its emotional power. A world where nobody laughs feels empty. A world where nobody has fun feels less worth saving. And that is why the humor matters so much. It is not there because the show needs jokes. It is there because the characters need humanity. The best version of this adaptation would not need to completely change its tone. It would not need to become a comedy. It would not need to copy every joke from the animated series. It would simply need to remember that hope is not the opposite of darkness. Hope exists because darkness exists. Aang's optimism matters because he has every reason to lose it. Sokka's humor matters because he is scared. Katara's warmth matters because she has seen suffering. Iroh's kindness matters because he has experienced loss. The light is not distracting from the story. The light is the reason the story has meaning. And that is probably the biggest lesson this first season still needs to learn. Avatar is not powerful because it has a great fantasy world. Plenty of shows have that. It is powerful because inside that fantasy world, people feel recognizable. They laugh. They fail. They annoy each other. They forgive each other. They grow. That is the heartbeat Netflix's version is still trying to find. Because right now, it has the shape of Avatar. It has the mythology. It has the visuals. It has the famous moments. But the thing that made the original unforgettable was never just what happened. It was how it felt to be there with those characters while it happened. And that is probably where the acting conversation gets complicated. The cast is not the problem in the way people sometimes make it sound. This is not a situation where everyone involved misunderstood the characters or gave a completely empty performance. The bigger issue is that the performances are often fighting against the adaptation itself. They are trying to bring animated characters into a more realistic world, but the show does not always decide what kind of realism it wants. The animated series had a very specific balance. The characters could be dramatic without feeling overly serious. They could be emotional without sounding like they were giving speeches. They could say something heartbreaking one minute and something completely ridiculous the next. Live action requires a different approach. The actors cannot simply recreate the exact energy of animation. They need to translate it. They need to find the human version underneath the larger-than-life personalities. And sometimes the show succeeds at that. There are moments where you forget about the adaptation and just see the character. You see Zuko's frustration, his insecurity, his need for approval. You see Iroh's sadness beneath his kindness. You see the pressure surrounding Ousley and the way power has shaped him. Those are the moments where the series feels most confident. Zuko's storyline especially benefits from the fact that his emotions are naturally dramatic. He is a character built around conflict. He is angry, but he is also hurt. He wants revenge, but he also wants acceptance. He wants to prove himself, but deep down he is searching for something much simpler, a place where he belongs. That contradiction gives the actor something meaningful to play. The same is true with Iroh. His character works because his warmth is not just a personality trait. It comes from experience. He is someone who has lost things, learned from mistakes, and chosen kindness anyway. When the writing allows that to come through, the performance feels genuine. The hero side is harder because those characters depend more on chemistry. Aang, Katara, and Sokka do not just need individual performances. They need a shared rhythm. They need to feel like three different personalities constantly bouncing off each other. Aang needs someone who challenges him. Katara needs someone who frustrates her. Sokka needs people who can bring out both his confidence and insecurity. Without that energy between them, the group can feel more like three characters traveling together rather than a family slowly forming. And again, that is not entirely on the actors. A lot of the problem comes from the material they are given. If the script constantly puts characters into serious conversations about destiny, responsibility, and trauma, there are fewer opportunities for natural chemistry to develop. An actor cannot create years of friendship in a scene that only gives them a few lines about friendship. That is something the animated series had an advantage with. The characters had dozens of small interactions where their personalities could collide. The audience learned how they joked, how they argued, how they annoyed each other, and how they cared for each other. The live-action version often jumps straight to the emotional conclusion. It says, these characters matter to each other. But it does not always spend enough time showing us why. And that affects the performances because chemistry is not something you can simply announce. It has to be built. The good news is that chemistry can grow. Young actors especially can become much more comfortable with characters as they spend more time in those roles. A first season of any large fantasy adaptation is a difficult adjustment period. Everyone is learning the tone, the world, the physicality, and the expectations. So the potential is there. The cast clearly has moments where they understand the characters. What they need in future seasons is a script that trusts them enough to be less formal, less perfect, and more human. Let them interrupt each other. Let them make mistakes. Let them have awkward conversations that do not end with a lesson. Let them discover who these characters are instead of constantly reminding the audience who they are supposed to be. Because the strongest performances in Avatar are not the ones where characters explain their feelings perfectly. They are the ones where you can see the feeling before anyone says a word. A look from Zuko. A moment of silence from Iroh. Aang trying to smile when he is clearly hurting. Katara pretending she is fine when she is not. Sokka making a joke because admitting fear would be harder. Those small moments are where these characters become real. And that is what the cast needs more opportunities to create. The foundation is there. The effort is there. The respect is there. Now the show needs to give its actors room to stop performing the idea of Avatar and start simply living inside it. Top of form. Bottom of form. The writing plays a huge part. When characters are constantly moving from one major event to another, there is less room for natural interaction. The actors are not given enough quiet moments where their personalities can come through without the pressure of explaining the story. A good friendship on screen is built in the spaces between the important scenes, not just during the moments where characters announce how much they care about each other. That's why the trio sometimes feels more like a team formed by circumstance rather than a family that slowly found each other. They have the same mission, they share the same dangers, and they clearly want to help one another, but the emotional journey of becoming close friends is missing some important steps. Sokka is probably the clearest example of this because his character depends so much on personality. He is not just supposed to be the funny one. His humor comes from insecurity. His sarcasm comes from trying to prove that he matters. His confidence is often a mask covering the fact that he is a normal kid standing beside people with incredible abilities. The original series understood that balance. It let him be ridiculous while also showing why he was valuable. The live-action version gives him some of that, but not enough. He becomes more serious and responsible, which is understandable, but some of the strange, awkward energy that made him memorable gets reduced. Without enough humor and chaos around him, his growth becomes less noticeable because we do not get to see as much of the person he is growing from. Katara has a similar issue. Her strength and compassion are there, but she often feels defined by responsibility. We see her care about people. We see her want to become stronger. But we do not always get enough of the stubborn, emotional, sometimes frustrated person underneath. She is supposed to be someone who feels everything deeply, and that includes joy, anger, excitement, and even moments of being completely wrong. Aang might have the hardest challenge of all because the character requires a very specific balance. He has to feel like a child while carrying the weight of the entire world. The sadness and guilt matter, but so does the sense of wonder. The reason Aang's journey is powerful is because he is not just a chosen one. He is a kid who wants to laugh, play, and avoid responsibilities he never asked for. When the show focuses too heavily on the Avatar side of Aang and not enough on the child side, something important gets lost. His pain becomes easier to understand, but his joy becomes harder to feel. And without that joy, the tragedy does not hit as strongly. The good news is that this is an area where the show has the most room to improve. Unlike a world-building problem or a structural problem, chemistry can grow. Actors become more comfortable with each other. Writers learn which parts of the characters work best. Directors can create more relaxed scenes where personality comes before plot. A second season could do a lot simply by allowing these characters to exist together more. Let them travel. Let them argue over small things. Let them laugh. Let them have moments where the world is not ending for 5 minutes. Those moments are not distractions from Avatar. They are what make the bigger moments matter. Because at the end of the day, Avatar has never been remembered only because of bending fights or fantasy lore. People remember it because they cared about these characters. They watched 3 kids from completely different backgrounds slowly become a family. The Netflix version has the right characters, the right world, and the right foundation. What it needs now is time and confidence. It needs to stop treating the relationships as something the audience already understands and start building them from the ground up. The potential is there. The spark is there. But for this adaptation to truly become great, it needs to remember that Avatar was never only about saving the world. It was about the people who saved it together. That is not entirely Gordon Cormier's fault. Aang is a difficult character because so much of what made him special in animation came from timing, expression, and movement. A cartoon character can shift from comedy to heartbreak in a way that feels completely natural because animation allows for exaggeration. A look, a pause, a small change in expression can communicate an entire emotional shift. In live action, those same moments require a different kind of precision. The challenge is that Aang cannot just be sad. A sad child is easy to understand. A child who is carrying impossible responsibility while still wanting to laugh and play is much harder. The performance needs to constantly balance those two sides, and the show does not always give him enough opportunities to show both. The strongest moments for Aang are usually the quieter ones. The scenes where he is not being asked to deliver a message about destiny or explain how he feels. When the show allows him to simply react, you get glimpses of the character people love. You see the kindness, the curiosity, and the innocence that made him such a unique protagonist. Those moments are important because Aang's biggest strength was never just his power. It was his humanity. The reason audiences cared about him becoming the Avatar was because they first cared about him as a kid. The journey was never about turning Aang into a weapon capable of defeating the Fire Nation. It was about helping him understand that he could carry responsibility without losing the person he was. That idea is where the live-action version sometimes struggles. It understands Aang's burden very well, but it has less confidence in his joy. It understands why he is important, but it does not always spend enough time showing why he is lovable. And that difference matters. Because when Aang eventually faces impossible choices, the audience needs to remember the child underneath the title. They need to feel that this is not just the Avatar protecting the world. This is a kid trying to protect a world that took everything away from him. The good news is that the foundation is still there. Gordon Cormier has the right qualities for Aang. There is a natural warmth to the performance, and with more relaxed writing and more room to develop the character, he could grow into the role significantly. Future seasons could give him more chances to show the playful side, the stubborn side, and the chaotic energy that made Aang such a memorable character. Because Aang should not just be the emotional center of the story because everyone depends on him. He should be the emotional center because people want to follow him. That is the difference. A great Avatar story is not built around a chosen one who has to save everyone. It is built around a kid who slowly discovers that he does not have to carry everything alone. And that is the version of Aang this adaptation is still trying to find. The live-action version understands Katara's role in the story, but it does not always understand the contradictions that make her interesting. It sees the compassion, the determination, and the desire to become stronger, but it sometimes misses the emotional storm underneath all of that. Katara is not powerful because she is always calm or always right. She is powerful because she feels things deeply. Her anger comes from caring. Her frustration comes from wanting to help. Her stubbornness comes from refusing to accept that people are powerless against the world around them. Those flaws are part of what make her growth satisfying. Without enough of those flaws, her journey loses some of its energy. Her relationship with bending is another area where the adaptation struggles. In the original story, Katara becoming a waterbender was not just about learning techniques. It was about confidence. It was about discovering that something she thought was impossible was actually within her. Her growth was emotional as much as it was physical. The Netflix version gets the basic idea, but the progression feels compressed. We are told that Katara wants to improve and that she has potential, but the process of becoming a true bender does not always feel as personal as it should. The victories happen, but the emotional steps between them are sometimes missing. That is a recurring issue with this season. The important moments are there, but the journey toward those moments is often shortened. Katara needed more time to fail. More time to get frustrated. More time to doubt herself and then push through that doubt. Because when a character grows without enough struggle, the growth becomes something we observe instead of something we experience. The same applies to her relationship with Aang and Sokka. Katara is supposed to challenge them. She is the person who pushes Aang when he avoids responsibility and pushes Sokka when his insecurity turns into arrogance. She is the emotional backbone of the group, but that does not mean she should always be the serious one holding everyone together. Sometimes the person holding everyone together is also the person who needs someone else to hold them together. That vulnerability is what gives Katara depth. The best version of Katara is not a perfect healer or a perfect friend. She is a kid trying to become someone stronger because she has seen what happens when nobody is strong enough to fight back. She carries anger, fear, hope, and compassion all at the same time. The Netflix version has the compassion and the determination. What it needs more of is the fire. And ironically, that missing fire is what makes the character feel less memorable, because Katara's strength was never just about water. It was about the emotional force behind it. There are still moments where Kiawentiio brings the character closer to life. When Katara is allowed to be vulnerable or express genuine frustration, the performance becomes much more engaging. You can see the potential. You can see that she understands the emotional foundation of the character. The problem is that those moments are too spread out. Too often, the script places Katara in the position of explaining feelings rather than experiencing them. She becomes the person who understands the situation, the person who gives support, the person who says the meaningful thing. But characters become memorable through imperfections, not just wisdom. Future seasons could improve this easily by letting Katara be more unpredictable. Let her argue. Let her make mistakes. Let her laugh more. Let her be stubborn. Let her have moments where she is not the emotional guide of the group but simply another kid trying to figure things out. Because Katara is not important because she represents kindness. She is important because she represents what happens when kindness refuses to become weakness. That is the version of Katara this adaptation has not fully reached yet. Sokka is supposed to bring chaos, humor, and a very human kind of insecurity. He is the person who reminds the audience that not everyone in this world has some special power or destiny. He is just a kid trying to survive in a world full of people who can bend elements and change history. That is what makes him important. His value was never supposed to come from being the strongest person in the room. It came from the fact that he kept showing up anyway. He was scared, inexperienced, and often completely out of his depth, but he still wanted to help. That is a very different kind of heroism. The Netflix version understands that idea, but it does not always capture the personality that made Sokka memorable. Too much of his insecurity gets turned into simple responsibility. Too much of his humor gets turned into harmless commentary. He becomes the practical member of the group instead of the messy, unpredictable person who slowly learns how to become a real leader. And that change has consequences because Sokka's comedy was never just there to make people laugh. It was a defense mechanism. His jokes were how he handled fear. His sarcasm was how he protected himself from feeling powerless. His confidence was often something he performed because admitting that he was scared would mean admitting how much pressure he was under. That complexity is what made him more than the funny guy. The live-action version gives him moments of being protective and clever, but it often skips over the uncomfortable parts that make those qualities meaningful. We don't see enough of the kid who is pretending to know what he is doing because he feels like he has to. We don't see enough of the insecurity underneath the confidence. And without that, his growth becomes less noticeable. A character arc works because we can compare who someone was at the beginning to who they become later. If Sokka starts too close to the finished version of himself, there is less emotional distance to travel. This is also where the chemistry with Aang and Katara suffers. Sokka's personality should create friction inside the group. He should annoy them sometimes. He should make situations harder because he thinks he knows better. Then, through those conflicts, the audience sees why these people eventually become a family. Perfect teamwork is not what makes a friendship believable. The disagreements do. The awkward moments do. The moments where someone says the wrong thing and then has to figure out how to make it right. The Netflix series often skips past those rougher interactions, and as a result, the group feels smoother but also less alive. Sokka especially needed those moments because his whole journey is about becoming someone who can contribute without pretending to be something he is not. He does not need to become powerful like Aang. He does not need to bend like Katara. He needs to discover that intelligence, courage, creativity, and loyalty are their own forms of strength. The good thing is that this character still has plenty of room to grow. The foundation is there. The actor brings enough charm that you can see the potential. With stronger writing, more humor, and more willingness to let Sokka be awkward and imperfect, the character could become one of the strongest parts of the series. Because Sokka does not need to be fixed. He needs to be allowed to be himself. The strange, stubborn, sarcastic, insecure, brave kid who keeps pretending he has everything figured out until one day he actually does. That is what made Sokka special. And that is what the adaptation needs to bring back. Seeing more of Zuko's past and his relationship with the Fire Nation royal family helps explain the person underneath the anger. It gives more context to why he is so desperate for approval and why losing his place in the world affected him so deeply. That is the kind of expansion an adaptation should make. Not every change needs to be bigger. Not every change needs to add more mythology or more explanation. Sometimes the best changes are the ones that reveal something already hidden inside the character. Zuko always had one of the strongest emotional foundations in Avatar, and the Netflix version understands that. His conflict is not really about defeating Aang. It is about a teenager who has convinced himself that one achievement will finally make him worthy of love. That is heartbreaking because the audience can see what Zuko cannot. The thing he is searching for was never something he could earn from his father. The scenes between Zuko and Iroh are where the show often feels closest to the emotional spirit of the original. Their relationship works because there is a constant tension between where Zuko is and where Iroh wants him to be. Iroh sees a wounded kid. Zuko sees someone standing in the way of his goal. That difference creates the emotional power. Iroh is not just giving advice. He is patiently trying to show Zuko that he is more than the version of himself the Fire Nation created. But he does not have to define his entire existence around one moment of failure or one person's rejection. Paul Sun-hyun Lee brings a lot of warmth to Iroh, and while the character is slightly different from the animated version, the heart of him is still recognizable. The humor is more restrained, and the performance leans more toward the wise mentor side, but there is genuine kindness there. The challenge with Iroh is that his lightness matters as much as his wisdom. His jokes, his love of tea, his relaxed attitude, all of those things make his deeper moments hit harder because they reveal that his peaceful nature comes from experience and loss. The live-action version sometimes focuses more on the sadness behind Iroh, which works, but it could use more of the joy as well. Iroh is not just a man who survived tragedy. He is a man who chose kindness after experiencing tragedy. That choice is what makes him powerful. Still, compared to many other parts of the season, Zuko and Iroh feel more complete because the emotional direction is clearer. Their scenes are built around conflict, regret, love, and identity rather than simply moving the plot forward. Zuko also benefits because the show allows him to be complicated. It does not completely turn him into a misunderstood hero too early. He can still be cruel. He can still be arrogant. He can still make terrible decisions. But you understand why he became that way. And that is the key to writing a great antagonist. Understanding someone does not mean excusing them. The show succeeds when it makes you feel sympathy for Zuko while still recognizing that he has a long way to go. That is why his storyline often feels stronger than the hero side of the season. His conflict is internal. He is fighting himself as much as he is fighting Aang. Every victory he thinks he needs creates another wound. Every step toward his goal pushes him further away from the person he could become. That is compelling drama. If future seasons can bring some of that same patience and emotional detail to Aang, Katara, and Sokka, the entire series could become much stronger. Because Zuko proves that this adaptation is capable of finding the heart of these characters. It just needs to trust the process. The biggest success of Netflix's Avatar is that it shows the world and characters still have the power to work in live action. The biggest frustration is that sometimes it feels like the show understands its villains more than it understands its heroes. Rather than salvation. It helps the show. It doesn't complete it. Still, the action deserves credit because when it works, it shows exactly why this universe was always a good candidate for live action. The idea of bending has always been cinematic. Each element has its own personality. Water is flexible and flowing. Earth is heavy and powerful. Fire is aggressive and explosive. Air is movement itself. The challenge was never whether these powers could look impressive. The challenge was making them feel connected to the characters using them. And that is where the action is sometimes uneven. The best fights in Avatar were never just about who had the stronger attack. They revealed personality. Aang's movements showed his playful nature and his refusal to fight like a traditional warrior. Katara's bending reflected her emotional growth and determination. Sokka's lack of bending forced him to rely on strategy, creativity, and courage. Zuko's fire bending was tied directly to his anger, discipline, and inner conflict. The Netflix version understands the appearance of bending, but it does not always capture the character behind the movement. Some fights look impressive, but they feel more like fantasy combat scenes than extensions of who these people are. The choreography can be powerful, but it sometimes lacks the personality that made the original battles so memorable. There are exceptions. When Zuko fights, you often feel more of the character through the action. His movements are aggressive and emotional because his entire identity is built around struggle. When he uses fire, it feels personal. It feels like a reflection of everything he is carrying. Those moments work because the action is connected to the character. The same should be true for everyone else. Aang's airbending should feel joyful and unpredictable. Katara's waterbending should feel like a combination of control and emotion. Sokka's strength should come from intelligence rather than simply standing next to people with powers. The action needs to remind us who these characters are, not just show us what they can do. The show also occasionally struggles with scale. Some battles feel huge because of the effects and sound design, but the emotional stakes are not always equally developed. A massive visual moment only becomes memorable when the audience understands why it matters. The best fantasy action is never just about destruction. It is about what is being protected, what is being lost, and what the characters are willing to risk. That is the pattern throughout this adaptation. The pieces are often there. The production understands the assignment. The world looks closer to the Avatar fans imagined than anything that came before. The bending has weight. The costumes and sets create a believable fantasy world. The music knows when to make a moment feel important. But Avatar was never carried by one element alone. Not the bending. Not the lore. Not the war. Not the visuals. It worked because everything came together around the characters. The world felt alive because the people inside it felt alive. That is where the Netflix version still has the most room to grow. It has built the stage. It has created the world. It has shown that a live-action Avatar can exist. Now it has to focus on making that world feel lived in. Because the greatest moments in Avatar were rarely just about saving the world. They were about the small choices people made while trying to survive it. A joke between friends. A quiet conversation. A mistake that becomes a lesson. A moment where someone chooses compassion instead of anger. Those are the moments that turned Avatar from a fantasy adventure into something people still care about years later. And that is the challenge for future seasons. Not making the world bigger. Not making the fights louder. Not adding more explanation. The challenge is making it feel human. Because the best Avatar fights were never memorable because they were the biggest. They were memorable because they revealed something. They showed fear, confidence, creativity, desperation, growth. They showed characters making choices under pressure. That is the missing piece sometimes in the Netflix version. The action is there, but the meaning behind the action is not always strong enough. A fight should feel like a conversation between two people who happen to be using elements instead of words. Every movement should tell us something. A defensive stance should reveal caution. A reckless attack should reveal anger. A clever move should reveal intelligence. A mistake should reveal insecurity. When that connection is missing, the action becomes something you watch instead of something you experience. And this is especially important because Avatar's bending system has always been one of the smartest parts of its world. The elements are not just magical abilities. They represent different ways of thinking. Water adapts. Earth endures. Fire pushes forward. Air avoids and redirects. The original series built entire fighting philosophies around those ideas. That gave every battle a sense of identity. The live-action version understands the visual side of that idea, but it does not always communicate the philosophy behind it. You can see the elements. You can hear the impact. You can feel the scale. But sometimes you are missing the personality underneath. Still, this is an area where the show has a strong foundation. The technology is there. The effects are improving. The performers are learning the physical language of the characters. Future seasons have the opportunity to make the action feel more natural, more creative, and more connected to character development. Because when Avatar is at its best, the action is not separate from the story. It is the story. That is the bigger pattern with this adaptation. Almost every major criticism comes back to the same thing. The pieces are present, but the connection between them is sometimes weak. The world looks right. The music sounds right. The bending exists. The characters are recognizable. The story beats are familiar. But Avatar was never special because it had 4 elements or a cool fantasy setting. It was special because those elements were connected to people. The world, the powers, the humor, the friendships, and the emotional moments all worked together. The Netflix version gets close to that feeling in certain moments. There are scenes where everything lines up and you remember why this story has lasted so long. You see the potential. You see the version of the adaptation that could fully capture what made the original beloved. But too often, the show feels like it is assembling Avatar rather than living inside it. And that is why the reaction has been so complicated. This is not a disaster. It is not a careless adaptation that ignores what came before. There is respect here. There is effort here. There are genuine strengths. But respect alone cannot recreate the feeling of a story. The next challenge for the series is not proving that Avatar works in live action. It already proved that. The challenge is understanding why Avatar worked in the first place. It was never just about the Avatar mastering the elements. It was about a lonely kid finding a family. It was about people carrying pain and still choosing kindness. It was about a world damaged by war but still full of laughter, friendship, and hope. That is the spirit the adaptation needs to protect. Because the goal should not simply be to make a bigger Avatar. The goal should be to make an Avatar that feels alive. It wants the audience to understand the cost of this conflict instead of simply watching it as a fantasy adventure. And again, that instinct makes sense. The problem is not that the show takes the war seriously. The problem is that it sometimes forgets what the characters are fighting to protect. Because the heart of Avatar was never just stopping the Fire Nation. It was protecting the small pieces of life that still existed inside that broken world. The friendships. The jokes. The traditions. The ordinary moments that people refuse to lose even after years of conflict. Without those moments, the war becomes an idea instead of an experience. That is why some of the darker changes work better than others. The Fire Nation material often benefits from a heavier approach because the conflict naturally belongs there. Zuko's storyline is about shame, rejection, and trying to earn love from people who hurt him. Iroh's story is about regret, wisdom, and someone who has seen the cost of ambition. Azai represents power without compassion. Those themes can handle a more serious tone because the characters themselves are built around emotional weight.